What would you do if the woman meant to be your bride stepped off the stagecoach with a bruised face and a note begging you to protect her? That question hit Nathaniel Reed like a blow to the chest the moment he saw her. It all began 3 days earlier when a water-stained letter arrived at his lonely Montana cabin. Nathaniel had spent 8 harsh winters alone, talking more to the walls than to any person, until he finally wrote to the mail-order bride agency. He had expected silence in return. Instead, he received a reply saying Miss Zoe Caldwell of Boston would reach Silverdale on the last Thursday of May. For the next 3 days, Nathaniel scrubbed the cabin until his knuckles burned, baked bread that turned out barely edible, and cleaned the spare room he had never expected to use. On Wednesday night, he trimmed his beard with shaking hands, caught a glimpse of his weathered face in the mirror, and whispered, "She'll take one look and run for the hills." But Thursday morning came bright and clear, and he had no time left to doubt himself. Silverdale was a small, dusty town with a saloon, a general store, a hotel, and not much more. Nathaniel tied his horse outside the stagecoach office, his stomach twisted in knots. Frank Wilson, who ran the place, gave him a knowing look. "Heard your bride's comin' today," Frank said. Nathaniel just nodded, wishing news didn't travel so fast in small towns. The stagecoach was late. Nathaniel paced back and forth, hat in his hands, fighting the urge to leave before she arrived. But when he saw the cloud of dust rising on the horizon, he forced himself to stay put. The stagecoach rolled to a stop. The driver tossed down a trunk. Then he helped a small woman in a worn blue dress step out. She looked around nervously, her hands gripping her handbag. A thin veil hid most of her face. Nathaniel walked toward her. "Miss Caldwell?" She lifted the veil slowly. Nathaniel froze. Her left cheek was dark purple. Her lower lip split. The bruises were old enough to yellow at the edges, but clear enough to make his throat tighten with anger he hadn't felt in years. "Mr. Reed?" she asked softly. He nodded, unable to look away from her injuries. She fumbled through her handbag with shaking fingers and pulled out a folded note. I can explain?" she whispered. She held the paper out to him. "I would understand if you wish to reconsider." Nathaniel opened the note. The handwriting was careful and clear. "Dear Mr. Reed, the woman who arrives is not what you expected. Miss Caldwell has suffered at the hands of those who were meant to protect her. She comes to you in need of safety more than marriage. If you wish to dissolve this arrangement, the agency will return your fee in full." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He looked up, finding her watching him like a frightened deer ready to run. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low. She swallowed. "It doesn't matter. I'm here now, and you have every right to change your mind." Nathaniel studied her, really studied her. Beneath the bruises and the fear was something else. Strength, hope, a desperate need for someone, anyone, to choose her for the right reasons. He folded the note and placed it gently back in her hands. "Miss Caldwell," he said quietly, "you're not alone now." She blinked fast, as if unsure she'd heard him right. "You still want me here?" "I want you safe," he said. "The rest can wait." For the first time, her shoulders softened. A tiny breath escaped her lips, like relief. "My name is Zoe," she said. "Nathaniel," he replied. He lifted her trunk and helped her onto his horse, careful not to touch her bruised face even by accident. She stiffened as he mounted behind her, but she did not pull away. The ride was silent, her back rigid against his chest. When they reached the homestead, a sturdy cabin tucked in a small valley by a creek, Nathaniel worried she'd find it too small, too rough, too lonely. But when she stepped down and looked around, her expression softened. "It's lovely," she said quietly. He carried her trunk inside. The cabin was simple. A table, 2 chairs, shelves with a few books, a bed in one corner, and a tiny spare room he had prepared for her. "You'll have your own space," he told her. "It's not much." "It's perfect," Zoe said, surprising him. Then she faced him, chin trembling slightly but voice steady. "I want to be honest. I came here because I had nowhere else to go." "But I don't expect anything you're not willing to give." Nathaniel nodded. "And I want to be clear about something, too. Whatever happened before, it won't happen here. You're safe now." She nearly cried at those words. but she steadied herself and nodded. "Thank you. I'm not used to kindness." "You'll get used to it," he said. They shared their first meal that evening, simple stew and bread, and talked about the land, his struggles, and her life in Boston. He didn't push her for details, though he wanted to. Her eyes told enough. She had seen things no woman should ever see. That night, Zoe retreated to her small room. Nathaniel lay awake across the cabin, hearing the soft creak of her mattress, the rustle of blankets. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. He wondered what fate had brought her to him. This young woman with bruises, secrets, and quiet courage. And what he was meant to do now that she was here. But as he drifted toward sleep, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Nathaniel woke before sunrise, as he always did, but that morning felt different. The cabin was no longer silent. There was someone breathing softly behind the thin wall of the spare room, someone who had trusted him enough to sleep under his roof, someone who needed protection. Zoe. He moved quietly as he stoked the fire and put on coffee. When he stepped outside to tend the animals, he caught himself glancing toward the cabin door again and again, listening for any sign that she was awake or needed him. When he walked back inside, he froze. Zoe stood at the stove, her hair braided loosely down her back, turning eggs in a pan as if she had been doing it for years. "I hope you don't mind," she said, startled when she saw him. "Mind? No," Nathaniel replied. "You didn't have to cook. You should be resting." "I want to earn my keep," she said in a steady voice. "I can work. I can cook, sew, clean, garden. I'm stronger than I look." He washed his hands, studying her quietly. The morning light showed her bruise clearly, deep, purple, and yellow. Seeing it made his chest ache and his blood burn. "You don't need to prove anything to me," he said softly. Zoe stopped moving for a moment, the spatula trembling slightly in her hand. "I need to prove it to myself." Nathaniel understood more than she realized. "Fair enough," he said. "But today, you rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to start working." They shared breakfast, and Nathaniel explained his daily routine, tending the animals, checking the fence line, working the small fields, chopping wood, preparing the land for planting. Zoe listened carefully, her questions surprising him. She knew the work. She knew farms. "I grew up on one," she said when he raised an eyebrow. "Before my parents died." He didn't push her to say more. Later, he gave her a tour of the homestead, the creek that fed the cabin, the small barn, the vegetable garden waiting for spring. Zoe looked around with real appreciation. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, "so open and free." Nathaniel glanced at her profile. The breeze lifted strands of her hair. The bruises on her face couldn't hide the strength beneath. "It can get lonely here." She turned toward him. "I think I've had enough of people for a while. Lonely doesn't scare me." The days that followed settled into a gentle rhythm. Zoe insisted on helping with the housework despite Nathaniel's requests that she rest. She cooked meals far better than anything he'd made in years. She organized shelves, tended the chickens, and stitched new curtains for the windows. Bit by bit, the cabin shifted from a survival shelter into something homelier, warmer. Zoe moved with a quiet confidence, but Nathaniel noticed the little things, the way she jumped at sudden sounds, the way she avoided standing with her back to an open door, the way her eyes sometimes dimmed when she thought no one was looking. But little by little, those shadows softened. She began to laugh, soft, careful laughter at first, then warmer, freer. She began to talk, telling him about Vermont, about teaching piano to neighborhood children, about her mother's garden. But the darker stories came only when she was ready. One warm evening in June, as they sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the mountains, Zoe finally spoke of Boston. "My uncle wasn't always cruel," she began. "But after my parents died, something in him changed. He became controlling. And when I turned 21 this spring, he started arranging a marriage for me. A man much older, a man with a terrible reputation." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "When I refused," she whispered, "he hit me, again and again. He said I owed him, that he owned me." Nathaniel's fists curled so tightly his knuckles turned white. "You don't owe him anything," he said, forcing his voice to stay calm, "and he doesn't own you." Zoe blinked hard. I ran away that night. The agency helped me. They chose you because your homestead was remote, and because you had a reputation for being decent. Nathaniel let out a slow breath. They judged right. She looked at him, eyes shining with something he couldn't name. Thank you, she said softly, for giving me safety, for giving me time. Quote, that summer, they built a strange but comforting partnership. Not quite husband and wife, not quite strangers. They shared work, meals, and quiet evenings. Nathaniel kept his distance, never touching her unless necessary, always speaking gently, always letting her choose the pace. What neither of them spoke aloud was the one thing binding them more than anything. Their marriage papers still sat unsigned in Nathaniel's desk. Zoe never pushed. Nathaniel never asked. Yet each passing day made the question heavier. Then came the day they rode into town together to buy supplies. Zoe wore her best blue dress and kept close to Nathaniel, but she moved with a steadiness he hadn't seen when she first arrived. People stared, curious about the bride he'd brought home, but she held her head high. Nathaniel couldn't help noticing how the sunlight turned her hair golden, how the bruises had faded into nothing but memory, how her eyes looked brighter. But the peaceful trip ended the moment Sheriff Tom Blackwood stepped into the small restaurant where they were eating lunch. He removed his hat, cleared his throat, and said quietly, "Reed, I've got a message from Helena. Someone's been asking, round for a young woman matching your wife's description." Zoe froze, the color draining from her face. Nathaniel's heart dropped. "He says he's her guardian," the sheriff continued, "looking to bring her home, offering a reward." Zoe's fork slipped from her hand. Nathaniel reached across the table, steadying her trembling fingers. The sheriff lowered his voice. "I told him I hadn't seen anyone like that. But you too should be careful. And Reed, it might be time to make things official." Zoe avoided Nathaniel's eyes all the way home. When they reached the cabin, she paused beside the horse, gripping the saddle for balance. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't tell you everything." Nathaniel turned toward her. "You don't have to apologize." "My uncle, he won't stop," she said, voice breaking. "I should never have brought this trouble to your doorstep." Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice firm. "Zoe, listen to me. You didn't bring trouble. You brought life back into this place. You brought purpose. I don't regret a single moment since the day you arrived." She slowly looked up at him. "You mean that?" "I do." For the first time since she had come to the Montana Territory, Zoe relaxed into his presence, leaning slightly toward him. And Nathaniel knew then that trouble was coming. He could feel it in the wind, in the weight of the sheriff's words, in the fear behind Zoe's eyes. Someone was hunting her. Someone dangerous. And Nathaniel would have to decide how far he was willing to go to protect the woman who had unexpectedly become the most important part of his life. The sheriff's warning stayed with Nathaniel through every step of the ride home. Zoe held the saddle horn tightly, her back stiff, her breathing shallow. When they reached the homestead, she stayed seated on the horse longer than usual, as if gathering courage to climb down. When Nathaniel helped her, her hands were trembling. Inside the cabin, she sank onto a chair, wrapping her arms around herself. "You don't have to tell me anything," Nathaniel said gently. "Not unless you want to." Zoe stared at the floor for a long moment before she finally spoke. "My uncle altered my birth records," she said quietly. "He made me younger on paper so he could control my inheritance longer. So he could control me longer." She swallowed. "If he finds me, he'll drag me back to Boston and force me into that marriage." Nathaniel knelt in front of her. "That will never happen." She lifted her eyes, and he saw the fear swimming there. "The sheriff is right. If we were officially married, he couldn't claim me. But I don't want you to feel forced into anything because of my past." Nathaniel reached for her hands. "Zoe, I've never felt forced, but I don't want fear deciding our future. I want you deciding it." Her lips parted slightly, as if the idea was foreign, being allowed to choose. Days passed with a new tension settling over the homestead. Nathaniel worked with a rifle close by. Zoe kept the doors locked, even in daylight. And though they grew even closer, a single question hung between them every night. Would her uncle find her? But life doesn't pause for fear. Their partnership deepened. Their conversations grew longer. Their silent moments became comfortable. Then warm. Then something more. Late one August evening, After the day's work was done, they sat side by side on the porch, watching the sun fade. The sky blazed orange, shadows stretching across the valley. Zoe was unusually quiet. "What's on your mind?" Nathaniel asked. She turned to him, eyes soft but nervous. "I've been thinking about us." His heartbeat stumbled. "Not because of my uncle," she said quickly, "but because of you, because of how kind you've been, because of how safe I feel, because I care for you." Nathaniel let out a slow breath. "I care for you too," he said. "I don't know if I understand love," she admitted, "but I know I trust you, and I know I want to stay by your side. If you still want me, then I'm ready to make this official." Nathaniel cupped her cheek as gently as he could. "I've waited for you to say those words." And then he kissed her, a slow, careful kiss at first, asking permission, when she answered by leaning into him, her hand lifting to his chest. Nathaniel felt something inside him break open. The very next week, under a crisp September sky, they rode into town and stood hand in hand before the pastor. The sheriff signed as witness. It was simple, quiet, quick. But when Nathaniel slid the ring on Zoe's finger, she whispered, "This is the first choice of my own life." That night, they rode back to the homestead as husband and wife, their hands locked together the entire way. Their first night together was tender and slow, filled with trust and relief, and a kind of love that didn't need fancy words. They built a life in those fall months that felt too good to be true, until the day a carriage rolled up the main street of Silverdale. Nathaniel heard the commotion as he stepped out of the general store. By the time he saw the tall, well-dressed man stepping from the carriage, he knew. Zoe's uncle. Harrison Caldwell. The sheriff tried to intercept him, but Caldwell brushed past and shouted across the street the moment he saw Nathaniel. "Where is she?" Nathaniel stood tall. "She's my wife." "That marriage is invalid," Caldwell snapped. "She's only 20. She can't marry without my consent." A cold silence fell across the townsfolk gathered around them. Zoe stepped forward. She had come with Nathaniel to town that day, and though she trembled, her voice was strong. "I'm 21, Uncle. You know that. You lied to control me." Caldwell's face twisted with fury. "She belongs with me." "Enough," Nathaniel said, stepping between them. "She's staying with me. Because she chooses to, and because she's my wife by law." The sheriff nodded. "Mr. Caldwell, if you want to challenge a legal marriage, you can take it up with the territorial court. Until then, you're done here." Caldwell saw the truth in those words, saw the crowd standing behind the couple, saw Zoe standing tall beside her husband. And for the first time, the powerful man from Boston knew he had lost. "This isn't over," he hissed. Zoe met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, it is." Caldwell left Montana the next morning and never returned. Life slowly healed after that. The fear faded. Their home grew with each passing month. Their love deepened in the quiet routines of early mornings and late nights. And then one cold October morning, Zoe touched Nathaniel's hand and whispered, "I think I might be with child." Nathaniel's breath caught. From that moment on, every day carried a new joy. He watched her belly grow, felt the first flutter of their child beneath his hand, held her through long winter nights as snow piled against the cabin walls. When spring returned, so did their greatest blessing. At dawn, in a room filled with firelight and whispered prayers, Zoe gave birth to a daughter. "Amelia," she whispered as Nathaniel held the tiny bundle with shaking hands. "Our Amelia." Tears ran down Nathaniel's face. "She's perfect." And as the sun rose over the Montana mountains, Nathaniel pulled his wife close, their newborn daughter cradled between them. "You're not alone now," he whispered. Zoe smiled through her tears. "None of us are, not anymore." 5 years later, the homestead thrived with laughter. Amelia chasing chickens, little Joseph toddling behind, Zoe tending her garden, and Nathaniel watching them with a full heart. A lonely cowboy and a wounded mail-order bride had built something beautiful out of the broken pieces of their lives. Love, safety, family, home. And none of it would have happened without that bruised face, that desperate note, and a cowboy brave enough to say 7 simple words. "You're not alone now."